Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in.
That's what I want to know.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. Chris Illman has spent over 20 years in the FMCG and liquor industries, working in senior sales and marketing roles at blue-chip global companies, including Kraft Foods International, Foster's Group, South Corp, and most recently as head of sales and marketing at the Bickford's group of companies. Chris possesses a thorough knowledge of the key drivers for success in building brands in the food and beverage sector and consults to startup businesses to deliver growth strategies. He's a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and holds a Bachelor of Economics and Master of Marketing. Folks, so that we can keep running the show, Access Collins has sponsored this episode. Their revolutionary booking and inquiry management software for hospitality is designed to help operators increase foot traffic, maximize revenue, and tackle no-shows. And they're doing that. The average user on their platform sees 18% more web bookings, an increase of 25% on inquiry conversion rates, and up to 900 hours saved in admin each year through automation. If that might help you too, check them out at bit.ly/hosposponsor. Hello and welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me, James.
Chris, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm interested to hear a bit about your background and the story with Bickford's and the family of brands. And there are some in there that people might not even know you're involved in, some really interesting spaces that the group plays in. And you head up the sales and marketing for the group. So you'd be overseeing a whole range of different techniques and brands that are used to get in people's hands. So very excited to open the interview with you today. And as you know, the first question that I like to ask on the show is a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. So I'd love to know what you've brought to the program today.
The one that I'd love to share with both yourself and your listeners is an experience I had back in the mid-90s. So it was around about 1996. And at that particular point in time, I was running the Franklin's account as the state sales manager in Victoria. And at that particular time, I was working at Kraft Foods. We had a major product recall. In actual fact, Kraft peanut butter at that particular point in time had a salmonella issue. And being a very young, impressionable account manager, bulletproof, knowing everything, this was a real shock both to our business at that point in time, but also me personally. And it took some really good people around me to really help guide in terms of how to manage through that. And at that particular point in time, I was also dealing with a really aggressive and tough buyer. So there was no negotiation with this buyer. This was very much a one-way transaction. So what I quickly needed to pivot from in that particular scenario was being an account manager, sales related, to more a customer service agent, providing great communication, providing great detail to a buyer that was really just doing their job. And that was trying to get as much product on shelf in front of their competitive set at that particular point in time, Coles, Woolworths, which are obviously still around today. So yeah, it was a really interesting time where I really had to dive into the detail, be close to our business, negotiate with our business to try and find as much product as possible for that particular customer base. And the key insight behind that for me, which is then translated through to everything that I try and do going forward, is really trying to deliver the best customer experience. And that could be consumer or customer. And in that particular instance, it was all around communication, but it was doing the absolute best for my client at that particular point in time to put as much product on shelf. So it was a pretty intense time and lots of hours and lots of concern also for consumers at that particular point in time. But thankfully, we navigated through that. Suffice to say, I think I broke that particular buyer and we had some great working relationships post that.
Very good. Chris, I'd like to know, and just for you to elaborate a little bit more for listeners that aren't necessarily as familiar with the space, how did you navigate that problem? Because people hear salmonella and they're like, oh my God, this is, and product recall, like that's obviously quite a concerning thing. So tell us about how you navigated that issue to then solve it.
That particular business at that point in time, very deep with resourcing. So from what I remember of those particular days, it was the night before what stock was available, what stock therefore was sellable next day. Then there was an early morning conversation with the group. Who are we going to supply first? Who was going to necessarily need that stock? What was their stock quantities like on hand? What did we have at retail level? Were we running promotions? Was there a dynamic that was unclear from a broader business perspective that then dictated a need for that particular customer to be provided more stock than potentially their share, which was where everything usually started? So again, it was about staying really close to the customer at that particular point in time, understanding needs, understanding barriers, understanding tyranny of distance, getting stock from a central DC in Victoria to country Victoria. That might take a couple of days. So really understanding market dynamics, customer dynamics, and store dynamics to deliver a great outcome. So yeah, just great conversations primarily.
Okay, and you've touched a little bit more on how your conversations and your philosophy has changed since that time. Can you tell us then more about, and this is the second question, why you do what you do? So what is it that really inspires you to get out of bed and do what it is that you do every day?
What really drives and motivates me, and what I'm therefore passionate about, is actually developing talent. And within our business, we get the luxury and the ability to actually bring great talent into our business and see them grow within our business and allow them the space to try a lot of different things. So the Bickfords group not only sells non-alcoholic beverages and alcoholic beverages, we also have a number of hospitality venues around the country. We are the master of our own destiny when it comes to distilling, brewing, and filling capabilities with our production facilities, and obviously sales and marketing as two key functions fall underneath that. So we do have a lot of areas that our people can move within our organisation. So getting back to the point, what I love is bringing great talent into the business and developing them, and ultimately seeing them go on to do something that's really a motive or important to them. And I can think of a number of occasions where people have gone on to bigger businesses because that's their aim and that's their ambition. And we really celebrate that within our organisation because we've played a small role in developing that person to be great salespeople or great marketing or great hospitality personnel. And that puts a real stride in my step to know that I've played a very small role in doing that. Probably the second thing that gets me bouncing out of bed, going back to that point around our business, is that we're a very dynamic business. So one day is very different to the next. We might pivot out of a new product development innovation session where we're spitballing opportunities across our businesses into picking up a phone and having a tough conversation with a customer around availability or service levels or whatever that might be. So I really enjoy the flexibility and the entrepreneurial dynamic nature of our particular business. And that is very unique in our industry because when you look at our competitive set, whether it be on liquor beverages or non-liquor beverages, invariably they're global organisations, invariably they're larger organisations with many layers, and the speed by which those organisations move is incredibly debilitating. And I really respect and love what we do as a business where we can move really quickly around opportunities. I mean, the example I can give you is many years ago, we found an opportunity of ready-to-drink cocktails in-home, and we didn't have the filling capabilities on-site. So within 8 weeks, we'd formulated a formula, built packaging, found a contract manufacturer, filled and had it in a DC. I don't know of any other business in our space that can move as quickly as that. So that just gives you a flavour of the dynamic nature of our business, and which is pretty fun to work in.
That is very fast. If I just probe a little bit more on that, because you've talked a bit about the business, what sits behind that and really drives you fundamentally in your career? Because it's great to hear what excites you about the business, but what is it that really inspires you personally?
Problem solving is something that I love to get into, using whether that's data as the main source of information to provide a solution around, or working with people that ultimately have a barrier or a challenge. For me, it's around problem solving. Inevitably, that's one of my key strengths. We have a saying within our business, see it, say it, solve it for yourself. And I live by that. I use as much data as I can, but problem solving is really something that I have a natural tendency to want to complete or to solve. And that allows us to move pretty quickly through whatever issues, personal, professional, other. So yeah, that problem solving area is something that's part of the DNA.
Perfect. Well, if we take an adjacent step in this tale, could you tell us more? I want to say step back, but it's not back because we've been pretty lateral with the why. Tell us more then, for listeners who don't know what Bickfords is and the Bickfords Group, what the business does and what you do within the business.
It's quite a wide business. So the Bickford's group of companies has 3 sales units within our organisation. So we're a liquor beverage manufacturer and producer and seller and marketer. We also do the same for non-alcoholic beverages. And we also have a homewares business, which is Will and Barrow Harmer Living. So brands that people know in our non-liquor business is obviously Bickford's portfolio. So that's Bickford's juices, Bickford's cordials, syrups. We have a range of mixes under the Bickford's and Sons trademark. On the liquor side of the business, we compete in every key category in liquor, whether that's wine, spirits, beer, cider, and ready to drink. We pretty much have an offer in every one of those categories. Brands that sit within our portfolio include brands like Queen Adelaide, Half Mile Creek, Beresford and McLaren Vale in our wine business, Beanley Rum, 23rd Street, and Vickers Gin as 3 spirit brands that we own. And then into our beer portfolio in 2017, we acquired the Vale Brewing, ongoing organisation or business that's based out of the Fleurieu Peninsula. So then we're able to attack in beer, and we've got some cider and some RTD brands. So yeah, quite a wide offering. My role within the group is I manage sales and marketing, which also encompasses all of our hospitality venues, as well as the creative elements within our business, whether that's content curation or content development, and our internal design team as well too. So quite a wide remit, but all based around ensuring that our brands are seen retail environment in the way that we would expect our brands to be seen and loved by our consumers.
Interesting to hear, and it indicates the business is huge, and you've obviously got a heap of other brands that sit under the group. But even then, you can feel the size of it with not being your huge conglomerates, international conglomerates, because you're obviously crossing a lot of different domains yourself there, where there could be heads of marketing specifically or head of sales specifically, where you're straddling a lot of different areas. So it must be challenging to put different hats on quite regularly. And as you said there, having one conversation then quickly going to another, I can imagine can pull you in a lot of different directions. Chris, in your answer there, it's quite clear that the business is very nimble. How do you actually maintain that ability to go from one thing to another, to move the process along so quickly to produce end product and make sure that it's safe, it tastes good, that people are going to like it?
Yeah, we've got some really strong belts and braces within the organisation to de-risk everything that we do, whether that's a brand investment, whether that's a new product development, a CapEx approval for a filler or fermenter or whatever it might be from an operational perspective. So we do treat ourselves and hold ourselves accountable as would a large global organisation. Where our challenge really comes in, though, is the prioritisation of what we do. And given our dynamic nature of our business, we really shoot for the stars and invariably reach that by just ensuring that we are working on the right things at the right time. And inevitably, we use a financial measurement on that. And sometimes we fail. Sometimes we devote our energy into areas that don't necessarily deliver a wonderful outcome financially for the organisation, but invariably we are prioritising around those financial benefits. We're also a really good organisation in drawing a lot of voices into a conversation to make the right decision. So the example I can give you there is with our new product development process. We have a stage gate process, which most organisations of our size or bigger have something similar. But what we do is we draw a lot of people into those conversations at strategic times to ensure that we're making the right decision. So it's not just a salesperson or a marketing person that's involved in that. We go wider. We bring our finance team in. We bring our sales analysts in. We bring different levels of marketing. We bring different levels of sales in operations. So we're making the right decisions for the business. So we're covering off what is the right thing for the consumer, what's the right thing for the customer. No use delivering a great product that a customer doesn't believe in, because inevitably they're the conduit to that consumer. So we are getting better and continue to optimize on how we bring multiple voices to the table to ensure we make right decisions. We use data where we need to, but we're also a very intuitive business as well. So we make decisions and we make them quickly. Inevitably over the journey, what I've experienced is that sure, you can go and spend a large sum of money with a research agency to de-risk a project, or you can just do a test market. And the beauty of our business in South Australia being a highly indexed portfolio in South Australia is we can test and learn out of SA. If it works in SA, to be fair, it can work in most markets. We do a lot of test and learn with our portfolio here, which, as I said, is the same cost as a research project. We actually get real data that comes from that and real engagement from our customer and consumer base to make some informed decisions.
It's interesting hearing that answer as well, because most of what you just described would slow the process. So, what is it in there? Is it a cultural thing that internally that everyone's just wanting to move forward as quickly as possible, or is it a structural thing? Do you have people who just give that final decision to move forward to the next step quickly?
It's a cultural thing. It's our DNA. Our owner MD, who has owned the business and run the business for over 25 years now, he is dynamic and entrepreneurial in nature, but calculates risk and takes risk when necessary. People that work well in our organisation do have a similar bent in terms of their ability to move at pace, the ability to make swift decisions with data, or potentially limited data that may be available to make great decisions, but inevitably that the key behaviours that are really important within our organisation for success of our people is their ability to be dynamic, their ability to think outside of the square, do what they say they're going to do, engage and include people around them to make great decisions, which obviously reduces risk, and ensure that not only are you doing the talking, but you're doing the listening piece as well too. And that again leads to great culture within our organisation where it is two-way. You're here, you are being heard, but you're also able in a safe environment to be able to put your point forward. And no idea is an average idea within our organisation. So we will interrogate those ideas and there will be reasons why to invest and reasons why not to invest. But one of the beauties of what I do and the way that I operate is to give people a lot of autonomy in what they do, because I know that when people feel valued and people are adding value, then they'll continue to jump out of bed and be super passionate about what they do. We're not an organisation, and I certainly don't operate in that fashion where I tell people what has to happen, when it has to happen and why, because ultimately if I've got to do that, then I don't need them. So in the end, it's about people really coming in and living the culture within our organisation, living our values. We have a very clear value set within our organisation based around empowerment, pride, integrity, collaboration and accountability. So those key values are the things that I recruit against. And those values, by the way, were all developed by our staff internally a number of years ago, where they were the values that were important to them and they were the values that they thought matched beautifully with what our business was about to drive us into that particular point in time, the 2020s and beyond. So key behaviours and values leading to great culture is what's driving a lot of our success.
I'm glad you elaborated on that one as well, because it made it more clear as to how you actually filter for people who possess those values. So it's something that you're looking for through the recruitment process. And quite clearly, the business is doing well to do that, whoever's doing the recruiting, whether it's through a HR team or through yourself, if that truly is the culture internally. Just on that note, Chris, around values, I was wondering how you're communicating them during the business operations. Like, how are you actually doing that post-recruitment to the rest of the team?
Ultimately, for me, we bring those values and behaviours to life through actually living them and modelling them. So what we don't do, and yes, we've got posters up in the office that says, oh, these are our key values, etc. But ultimately, great leaders and great people in organisation actually model the behaviours. And so everything that I do, I ensure that I review and refresh to make sure that my behaviours and the internal values that I've got are being modelled. The type of example that I could use from an integrity perspective is that we could act in such a way internally where we might be a bit disingenuous. We might make some decisions that sort of look right but don't feel right. And inevitably, as a group, we circle back on making sure that we make great decisions that have a high level of integrity, because that's repaid by our customer and consumer base over and over again. So could we sharpen up on the communication internally? Absolutely. But in the end, for me, it's modelling the behaviours. If one of our key behaviours is in engaging and including, and I'm not doing that, then that's only going to permeate through the organisation. And that flows through to an MD, that flows through to a CFO, that flows through to a head of HR and legal. Everyone within that senior leadership group within our organisation hold ourselves accountable to key behaviours and ensure that we live them. And each of us pull each other up, actually. That's probably the other thing as well, too, where we might be slipping in some areas. We might be looking a bit more inwardly. maybe disconnecting from a communication perspective, we've got a really strong relationship with senior management within our organisation where we can call that out and ensure that we're all taking care for each other to make sure that we're doing what's right for the business. Because the success of the business means success for us individually, and everyone has their own reason for doing what they do. And as I said at the start, I love problem solving and I also love developing talent. I can't develop talent, which motivates me, unless I'm being open, transparent, and acting in such a fashion that is approachable, as an example.
Where did you learn those things, Chris? Did you learn it from a business mentor? And is it a formal process? Was it through your career? People who've done things wrong, often people learn from how not to do things.
I'm going to go left of field here. Where I learned to work with people is through sport. And I've been coaching junior football and junior cricket. I first started coaching as a 19-year-old at the Blackwood Football Club coaching under 13 boys. And you imagine trying to communicate and educate 12, 13-year-old boys who know everything. It is easy, once you've done that, to educate, guide and mentor 25-year-old, 35-year-old male and females in a work environment. And in that sporting environment, if you can't communicate succinctly, if you can't lead by example, if you can't set a structure for success or a framework for success and develop tips and tricks along the way to execute against that plan, whether it's a game plan, etc., then you fail. You fail in your role. And I've got to be honest, yes, I've worked in some wonderful organisations. I've worked at Kraft Foods, I've worked at TWE, I've worked with TWE, I've worked with Diageo. I've worked with a lot of blue chip global organisations, a lot of learnings through those organisations. But I've got to say, where I've learned all of my lessons around people and working with people, it's been through coaching. It's been through working with kids and guiding them through a process to hopefully make them better people. And there's nothing more rewarding than bumping into a kid that you might have worked with years ago and they pull you up walking down the street and they say, oh, I remember when you did this and tried that and we worked on this and I learned something from that and I took that forward in my life. Yeah, and again, you get a real spring in your step from that. And that doesn't matter, by the way, whether it's a football coaching role or even into guiding and mentoring within a professional environment. And that's a great legacy piece as well, too, that you've contributed to someone and helped them out in some small way to be better people.
A really interesting application of sport in the business context. And it is quite a common one, but I don't believe one that I've really heard too much on the program. So thanks for sharing that, Chris. It sounds like it was possibly a bit of trial and error. I'm sure you got things wrong in the process of learning what to do correctly as well. Those young guys, yeah.
Oh, of course. You don't know it all, and even at my age now, and I don't need to divulge what that number looks like, but if you don't jump out of bed every day and learn something new, it's a pretty dull day. And I think that's something that might be lost these days around being vulnerable in such an environment that enables you to say, hey, I don't know it all. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay to learn. I'm okay to grow. And it doesn't matter whether you lead a group of 2 people or 2,000 people. Vulnerability, both professionally and personally, is something that if you can wrap your head around it and live it, geez, it can be really motivating for people around you to know that, like them, you're learning, you're growing, you're developing. And that doesn't stop. You should be growing and developing until the point by which they put you in the box and put you under the ground, because otherwise it's a pretty dull environment, pretty dull lifestyle.
Moving over to a very different topic around the rum landscape. And that's something that I wanted to definitely ask you about today. And Beanley was the reason that we connected. So can you tell us a bit more about what's been happening with Beanley and some of the exciting developments there?
It's been a really exciting time in Australian rum over the last 5 years. And we acquired the Beanley Distillery in 2012. And at that time, we also acquired the trademark. So 2 different transactions, bought the oldest working distillery back to life under the brand that it started with back in 1884, because over the journey, both the asset base or operational base and brand had been separated. From 2012, we've been heavily investing in rum. And if anyone had said to me in 2012 that Australian rum would be in the space it is now, I don't think I would have believed them. Right now, Australian rum is on the precipice of some wonderful opportunities going forward. And the reason why I'm seeing that at the moment is it's a craft gin category that exploded around 10 years ago. That experience, that thirst for knowledge around process and production and ingredients and storytelling is now playing beautifully over into Australian rum. So we, at the point in time of acquiring the business in 2012, we had the luxury of procuring some wonderful aged material. So we're able to do great premium executions, which are multi-award winning rums. Recently, our flood rum, which was actually back in 2017, we had the highest water level on the Albert River that had been seen since the 1880s, meant that we couldn't actually access our fermenters to actually decant what was in those fermenters at that particular point in time. So what a normal 2-week ferment for a rum base actually turned into close to 6 months. And so consequently, we had this extended ferment product, which then aged for 5 years, and we commercialised back end of 21, start of 22, and won multiple global awards for that particular product. So what that has enabled us to do is continue to talk to our craft positioning for Beanley Rum as being a pot still produced portfolio. So handcrafted, smaller volumes, great stories. As I said, oldest working distillery in the country with a traditional trademark that, the township of Beanley is named after the distillery. So that's pretty cool to know that you've now got the privilege of building that brand now into a global powerhouse. And we are now seeing real demand for our trademark now in markets like Europe, into the US of A, where we will now start to pushing into those markets, even Asia as well too. So both our export volumes and domestic volumes are pretty close now in terms of an overall volume perspective. So yeah, really exciting times with Australian rum at the moment. And that thirst for consumers for information and storytelling is something that we've been very mindful of since we took over the brand. And we haven't spent big money above the line and done all the sort of things that would normally be done in a category of this nature. We've been very focused on maintaining a craft positioning and a craft narrative around our portfolio, which is now starting to bear fruit to such a degree whereby it's really hard to keep up with demand now for product coming forward.
Just a quick question on there around that, the flood, a bit of real talk, when you're having those conversations internally around whether to release this possibly failed product, I'm sure those conversations were taking place where someone would have been like, no, it's been fermented way too long. This is going to taste awful when we age it in 5 years. And someone else is saying, yes, we need to, let's give it a crack. And it's become an award-winning rum. What was going on there? Where were things being pulled before it actually came to that and the decision was made?
It wasn't one particular stream in that particular instance. We had that extended ferment. We then distilled the product, laid it down in ex-bourbon barrels and some larger brandy vats just to see how the product would mature depending on that maturation solution. Then on a regular basis, brand would sit down with distillers to review that material and just really have great conversations. How do we see that material aging? What sensory evaluation are we getting out of this particular material? And therefore, where do we see this material in 2 years? Because obviously rum has to be 2 years of age to release. Or do we lay it down and give it a little bit longer to really develop character? And where it all sort of ended up was that we sort of got to that 2-year mark, reviewed it and gone, this is pretty smart liquid. So what do we want to do with that? And at that particular point in time, we just had as a business so much going on. So it's like, well, let's just leave it. We're selling reasonable volumes of a white rum, dark rum, and a spice rum and some RTD. So let's leave a premium execution that we know has high value, because at that particular point in time, we were never going to make flood rum again. I mean, it's not like we were waiting around for the Albert River to reach its peak again to produce this rum. So, it was only ever an experiment through as a consequence of what happened within the region. Obviously, it was out of our control. So we just left that there. And then it got to a point whereby the material was just too good not to bottle and release. We submitted it to a couple of spirit shows and got some really strong feedback on it. And so then we knew that we had something pretty special that we could bring to market, work with a couple of key customers like Dan Murphy's and some of these type of guys and put some volumes into those accounts and run a bit of activity through our venue in Beanley. And proof is now in the delivery of a complex, flavoursome aged rum that has a great story behind it. That extended fermentation is personally something that I'd never considered, and certainly it was debate from a distiller's perspective, because Wayne Stewart, who is our head distiller now up in Queensland, he's been working about the business for 35 years. So he's seen it all, and tapping into his knowledge and experience is some of the stuff that I really respect and love about what he brings to the business and enables us to make great decisions. So again, that's that collaboration and communication and engagement piece coming to life.
Chris, you talked about the changes that occurred in the Australian landscape around gin. And I guess before that was whiskey. We've had the craft beer movement. Because it sounds like you're suggesting that rum is the next one. I've heard some people saying it's tequila. I know right now, and we're April 2022, this may come out later in the year, that seltzer is exploding. There's hundreds of % growth on seltzer. You're talking about rum being the next big thing. And is that because it's part of your portfolio and you want to talk about it? I would think that. However, you're across a lot of different categories. So the fact that you say that indicates to me that maybe rum is something that you're really seeing.
I wouldn't necessarily say that if I weren't seeing it in the numbers. We're seeing triple-digit growth on our Australian rum portfolio, which is really, really refreshing because we've played the long game with our Beanley rum trademark. And as I said earlier, we haven't spent a ridiculous amount of money from an above-the-line perspective to try and communicate something that the brand isn't. We've built distribution in retail, we've built distribution in on-premise, we put the product in danger of being consumed by customers in both of those sales channels, done a power of work at store level, at events, provided an RTD format for convenience for consumers. But where I'm actually seeing the consumption increase is coming from those consumers and ultimately those customers who believe in local. And that is something that is consistent with gin, with Australian rum, craft beer. Consumers want a story. They want to believe in a story. They want integrity and authenticity with story, and they'll lean in on that. And the beauty of our portfolio, whether it's Beanley rum or Inner Circle rum, I fail to sort of recognise it. Inner Circle rum is a highly awarded rum that we're also producing out of our facility in Queensland, has a deep and an extensive narrative. The fact that we use our molasses from a local molasses grower through to our aged pod stills, through to the history of the site. We've got authenticity and integrity around what we do, and we've taken that long game. The other key contributor to volume growth at the moment is the appetite for Australian rum outside of Australia. And Europe, Asia are the two key regions at the moment that just love what we are doing as Australian rum manufacturer. And that's really born out of working with some key sort of distributors in those markets, presenting our portfolio, providing that context around what we're doing, and then they're picking this up and running with it. And again, that beauty of age and age material on hand for us is our real point of difference. And we're protecting all of that age product for future releases. So we're doing a power of work at the entry level, so that 2, 3, 4, 5 territory, but we're also restricting access to our age material and holding on to that because we know that there's inherent value, because we're seeing it with the awards that we're winning, whether it's San Francisco Wine and Spirits. But to your point, the other big one is tequila. Within our business, we do have a tequila product. We've sold more tequila in 3 months than we used to sell in a year. Again, the appetite for consumers for something new and different that primarily maps back to cocktails at the moment. That cocktail culture has exploded. With COVID, people were limited to their movements. And so they took the experiences that they would normally do out of home, in home. And as a consequence of that, full strength spirits has seen a real renaissance in home. And it's all got to do with cocktails. And what we're now finding in a retail sense is that ready to drink cocktails, ready to serve cocktails, ready to pour cocktails, they are 3 different executions that the consumer is going towards at a much greater rate, but they're also willing to make their own cocktails at home and experiment. So that's where 3 years ago, most consumers wouldn't pay more than $40, $45 for a tequila. Now they're okay to pay $100, maybe not at the same volume as $42, $40, but they're willing to have a crack at some premium tequilas. Again, story related, from a location that they've probably never been to or never get to, but gives them great flexibility in making a cocktail. And it's all about impressing friends, family, colleagues, etc., around knowledge around this particular stuff. So that ability to find something new and that gem that no one's heard of or seen of, that's a real plus with our portfolio as well too, because we still have a lot of brands in our portfolio that people are still finding and loving and telling their friends, telling their mates, and growing that out from there. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Some of the things that you described there kind of echo themes to me around other food businesses like HelloFresh and Blue Apron and whatnot. It sounds to me like the beverage industry is building out in that way, in a similar sort of way. Obviously, it's a different space, it's got its idiosyncrasies. But what is it that you're seeing that is different in the Australian industry? And I guess this is kind of leading me into more of a question around what you're learning about or exploring at the moment.
There's a real exploration into e-commerce and that new emerging sales channel that exists in e-commerce. And our retail partners are seeing the same opportunity. So Liquor Legends, which is a really strong key account group, primarily based out of Queensland, they're investing heavily in e-commerce and we're supporting them with that. Because we know that consumers are looking convenience and they're looking for ease of shopping. We do have our own marketplace e-commerce platform, which has seen tremendous growth, and we're also providing product onto different marketplaces to ensure that where consumers can't find our brands in retail, they can find it online. Primarily, that's the reason why our marketplace solution has been implemented, but our customer base is continuing to see huge growth in e-commerce. Probably some of the other trends that we're seeing, as I said, that cocktail culture in home is leading to a lot of different experiences being delivered in home. So it's not now just a gin and tonic at home. Now it's a gin cocktail. Some of the other categories that I think will explode in the next couple of years is rye whiskey. Rye whiskey is a really hard product to make. The Americans are the best ones at making rye whiskey because they have the capabilities to do so. Australian manufacture is very, very hard. So that has barriers to entry that as a business we like. So we are looking very, very heavily at scaling production of rye whiskey within our organisation due to those barriers to entry.
Chris, you touched on something there that did pique my interest just in your answer. Is it something that you're looking for within the Bickfords group, that there are high barriers to entry for brands? It kind of sounded like that's something that the business really just looks for.
100%, mate. There are really easy routes at the moment for new product development or new category development. You touched on it earlier, seltzer. As a business, we investigated seltzer 3 years ago. There's a great global conference that happens over in the US called the Natural Product Expo. And prior to COVID dropping in 2020, we would regularly go over and have a look at Natural Product Expo and then walk the stores, the BevMos, the Walmarts, and we'd have a look at what's happening in the US as a market. So we saw seltzers back in probably 2017 start to really take off with White Claw. But the problem with seltzers for us was that it's replicable. Anyone can take a vodka, can take a soda, can take a spritz of flavour, stick it in a can and commercialise it. And we saw this huge explosion in seltzers, but knew inherently that there was only going to be one or two big winners, and then there was going to be a lot of other brands that would be in and out in a short space of time. So what we chose to do is invest in areas of high barriers to entry, but also invest in trademarks and formats that we knew that weren't replicable. And the example I can give in that particular scenario is our 23rd Street portfolio. So that's a white spirit, dark spirit range produced out of Renmark, South Australia, where we've got our 3-pot stills down there. In looking at innovation in that particular category, we could have done a gin and tonic in a full sugar proposition. A lot of consumers understand that tonic is a really high sugar-based mixer. But given our expertise in non-liquor cordials juices, we're pretty adept at actually doing no sugar beverages through a range of different techniques. So we just took better for you drinking, combined it with convenience and wanting to build 23rd Street into a more ubiquitous, available trademark, and put together 23rd Street Gin and Tonic No Sugar that delivers, from memory, around about 87 calories per serve. So what we did was we were part of the occasion that seltzer fits, just with a format that and a brand and an execution that we knew would be really, really hard to replicate. And I'm pretty proud to say that execution went into every key national account. And to date, no one's really developed a similar tasting beverage to what we're delivering. And so consequently, really good barriers to entry, but delivering against the brand proposition. And as I said, of making the brand more ubiquitous. So I'm trusting, our competitive set doesn't listen to that narrative and all of a sudden come out with something similar. But barriers to entry are really, really important in what we do because, as I said, it's easy to put flavour, colour, alcohol and sugar or no sugar.
But interesting to hear, though, that you really have utilized your strengths in the soft drink space and then use that in another one of your brands. So having that sort of cross-pollination of knowledge and information across the hospitality and food and beverage industry, that's something that you're doing internally, which is great to see.
Another example of taking our width of offer within our portfolio is actually taking our different types of wood that we procure for our base beverages. So we're a large bourbon manufacturer. We're obviously a large rum manufacturer. So we repurpose a lot of those barrels into our beer program. So that's where we do a bourbon-aged stout. We do a rum-aged porter. So that's another example of using the full supply chain, but also triggering those barriers to entry, because a lot of our competitive set actually reach out to us and say, can we buy barrels? Can we get barrels? And it's like, well, if the time's right, happy to do the deal, but that's a great leveraging opportunity for us and something, as I said, that our competitive set find it difficult to do. So absolutely taking advantage of the full network of the operational elements of our business and bringing products to life.
Earlier on, Chris, you used an example from sport, and we talked a bit about that. I'd like to know more broadly, where are you looking in adjacent industries for inspiration and growth of the business?
We certainly look to international markets with synergies to the categories that we play in. So clearly that's bourbon, rum, gin, vodka. In the non-alc space, we're actually looking at flavours that are emerging in Europe and in Asia as well too. They can be quite problematic to procure. So you need to temper the idea with the procurement aspect of a unique ingredient. And we tend to try and do those international trips where we do pop ourselves in situ in growth markets that probably have a slightly different appetite for risk and a slightly different appetite for NPD. And that's something that gives us some inspiration. And probably the other key one, which is quite potentially not what you were thinking, is the pharmaceutical industry. There's a lot of innovation that happens in the pharmaceutical industry that potentially has some synergies with beverages. That's more of a long-term play that require legislation, government intervention to probably open up real opportunities. But basic hydration in the pharmaceutical industry is something that's quite underdeveloped within the industry. So that's an interesting space for us as well.
Yeah, and that was precisely what I was looking for something outside of the space you're in. What is it then that you are learning from that world?
There's quite a bit of margin in the pharmaceutical industry, so it's quite a rich territory financially to play in. There's different price points that play out in pharmaceuticals, so again, that's something that's quite interesting from our perspective, again, talking back to margins for both customer and supplier brand. But it's also a unique sales channel as well too, so again, barriers to entry. So does that lead to different opportunities in execution as well? Because Coles and Woolworths can't open up pharmacies, on the corner. So, is there something in that from a sales channel execution perspective that gives us a point of difference as well? So they're probably the three main areas.
Chris, reaching the end of the episode today, I just have one last question for you, and that's, who would you like to hear on the show?
Wow. Okay. The number one person that I'd love to hear on this particular show is a guy by the name of Stephen Sammartino. Steve and I used to work together many, many years ago at Kraft. He now positions himself as a futurist, but his narrative and stories from back in the days when we worked at Kraft that then have played through into what he's done going forward. I love hearing those stories from him, and I think your listeners would really appreciate that. So I'm happy to make that connection for you as well too. Really great storyteller.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the program today. Chris, it's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks so much, mate. Really appreciate your time.
This program is hosted by James Henderson. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.